Welcome to Orange Coast Unitarian Universalist Church on Zoom. We respectfully recognize that our church property rests on Ahajiman and Tongva land. My name is Yulis Aiton, and I'm your worship associate today. I'm joined by Beth Cyberson, our Director of Music Ministries, in welcoming you all. This morning, Beth is joined by Orange Coast Choir with Jen Mabey as narrator, and Phil Chipman will be singing and playing a solo later in the service. Reverend Judy, our Director of Religious Education, already held classes for the children earlier this morning, and she will offer one for our youth after the service. I would like to invite you to open the chat box, and if you haven't already said hello this morning, we will be turning the chat off during the sermon portion of the service so as not to distract, but we will turn it on right afterwards. As Unitarian Universalists, we have many different beliefs, but we are one loving community. We are bound together not by a common set of rules or beliefs, but rather a covenant. A covenant is simply a promise that whatever our beliefs, we accept one another and encourage each other in spiritual growth. We affirm that all life has inherent value and that all existence is interconnected. We strive for justice and compassion in our deeds and relationships, and we are committed to creating a welcoming community without regard to the traits that sometimes divide people. I want to extend a special welcome to visitors. If you are seeking a spiritual home, we hope that you will find it here. After the service, we will be placing everyone who remains into Zoom breakout rooms for 20 minutes of coffee and conversation. Everyone is welcome to join in, and it's a great way to get to know people in the congregation. Our worship begins with the lighting of our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalist tradition, and as we light it, we say our unison affirmation. If you have a chalice or candle at home, we can light them together. Please join me now as we begin. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. To dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to help one another. This we affirm together.
Good morning, everyone. This morning's opening song is going to speak the words of the great civil rights activist Ella Baker. She was really, really busy in the 1950s and 60s fighting racism and sexism and classism and all of it. And we are not done yet, so we need to continue speaking her words. This is a song by Bernice Johnson Reagan, who is also in Sweet Honey in Iraq. And I encourage you to clap along with me. I'm going to be playing my djembe. Clap along with me. And you will sing the chorus with the words that are on the screen, and I will sing the verses, and we'll go back and forth. Here we go. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Until the killing of black men, black mothers, sons, is as important as the killing of white men, white mothers, sons. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. To me, young people come first. They have the courage where we fail. And if I can shed some light as they carry us through the gale, we who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. The older I get, the better I know that the secret of my going on is when the reins are in the hands of the young who dare to run against the storm. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. One more time. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes.
Welcome everyone to the Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday. This is the day we lift up the words and wisdom of Reverend King. So of course I want to open up with these words by him. He says, the ultimate weakness of violence is that it's a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Through violence, you may murder the liar, but you cannot murder the lie, nor establish truth. Through violence, you murder the hater, but you do not murder hate. In fact, violence merely increases hate. Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. The question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice?
No one knows the exact origins of the song We Shall Overcome, but it might have been born in the 19th century, during the time of slavery in the United States. Its opening and closing lines are reminiscent of an old African-American spiritual, "No more auction block for me." Imagine enslaved people working in the fields singing something like this simple refrain. No more auction block for me. No more, no more, no more auction block for me. Many thousand gone. In 1901, an African-American Methodist minister named Charles Albert Tindley published I'll Overcome Someday, a hymn about spiritual warfare, not civil rights. The world is one great battlefield with forces all arrayed. If in my heart I do not yield, I'll overcome someday. I'll overcome someday. I'll overcome someday. If in my heart I do not yield, I'll overcome someday. In the late 1940s, Lucille Simmons led several hundred black women who were courageously picketing the tobacco plant where they worked. They were trying to raise their hourly wage to 65 cents. Lucille began singing this song, slowly and freely, encouraging her sisters to fight to overcome their oppression. We will win our rights. We will win our rights. We will win our rights someday. Zilphia Horton, a teacher at Tennessee's Highlander Folk School, learned the chant from the striking cigar factory workers, and she passed it along to Pete Seeger, who published it in 1947. He changed the word will to shall, perhaps because shall has a more open vowel, and he added more verses. Seeger's folk music colleagues, Guy Carawan and Frank Hamilton, changed the rhythm to a slow 12/8 tempo.
We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday.
In 1957, deputies broke into a classroom at Highlander Folk School, where they were teaching union and civil rights training. They cut the power and forced the students to lie in the dark as they smashed up the classrooms looking for communist literature. The trembling students on the floor began singing,
We shall overcome. We shall overcome.
One of the students was a 13-year-old girl named Jamila Jones. In order to control her fear, she made up a new verse to the song, which the students sang for 2 hours until the men left their school and left them alone.
We are not afraid today.
In the 1960s, a young black quartet called the Freedom Singers carried the tune and the hopeful words with them as they traveled around the United States, singing for peace and freedom.
We shall overcome.
I know
We shall overcome.
I know
We shall overcome someday.
Black college students sang as they were hauled away from whites-only lunch counters and thrown into police wagons.
we shall overcome.
In 1963, mourners sang the song as 4 little girls were pulled from the wreckage of their Sunday school room after a bomb went off at their church in Birmingham.
Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday.
In a huge rally in Washington, D.C., on August 28, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech, calling for the end of racism. At that event, Joan Baez led 250,000 of Dr. King's supporters in song.
We are not afraid today.
And on April 9th, 1968, in Atlanta, Georgia, a massive crowd of black people and white people linked their arms and sang, "We shall overcome," while marching behind Dr. Martin Luther King's funeral procession.
Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday.
And today, a century since its birth, "We Shall Overcome" is still being sung. It brings people together, it stirs people to action, and it provides strength to continue fighting for the rights of the oppressed everywhere. The song's even made its way around the world. It's been belted out by striking coal miners in Great Britain, by apartheid opponents in South Africa, and by student protesters in China's Tiananmen Square. And just in the last few years, it was sung at a Baltimore vigil for a transgender woman who was brutally beaten. Children of immigrants sang "We Shall Overcome" at a Capital Dream Act rally. it was sung countless times at Black Lives Matter protests in the summer of 2020. Now please join us as we sing together, "We Shall Overcome," to remember and honor all of those who have sung this song before us.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday.
We shall overcome someday. When will that day be? You know, the reading for today was from King's speech, Where Do We Go From Here? It was delivered at the annual Southern Christian Leadership Conference in Atlanta, Georgia in 1967. He'd had written a book about this, in fact. And I think a lot of us are asking in our nation the same question, right? Where do we go from here? And he has wisdom and far-seeing vision that has great advice for us, even today, because we're still wrestling with the same problems. He wrote this: as we talk about where do we go from here, we must honestly face the fact that the movement must address itself to the question of restructuring the whole of American society. There are 40 million poor people here, and one day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when we begin to ask that question, you're raising a question about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. And I'm simply saying that more and more, you've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. Now, don't think you have me in a bind today, he continues. I'm not talking about communism. What I'm talking about is far beyond communism. Communism forgets that life is individual. Capitalism forgets that life is social. And the kingdom of brotherhood is found neither in the thesis of communism nor in the antithesis of capitalism, but in a higher synthesis. It is found in a higher synthesis that combines the truths of both. Now, when I say questioning the whole society, it means ultimately coming to see that the problem of racism, the problem of economic exploitation, and the problem of war, they're all tied together. These are the triple evils that are interrelated. He continues, and if you will let me be a preacher just a little bit, one day a juror came to Jesus and he wanted to know what he could do to be saved. Jesus didn't get bogged down on that kind of isolated approach that you shouldn't do this or that. Jesus didn't say, now, Nicodemus, you must stop lying. He didn't say, Nicodemus, you must now stop committing adultery. He didn't say, now, Nicodemus, you must stop cheating if you're doing that. He didn't say, Nicodemus, you must stop drinking liquor if you are doing that excessively. He said something altogether different because Jesus realized something basic, that if a man will lie, he will steal. And if a man will steal, he will kill. So instead of getting just bogged down on one thing, Jesus looked at him and said, Nicodemus, you must be born again. In other words, your whole structure must be changed. A nation that will keep people in slavery for 244 years will thingify them, make them things, and therefore they will exploit them and poor people generally economically. And a nation that will exploit economically will have foreign investments and everything else, and it will have to use its military might to protect them. All of these problems are tied together. What I'm saying today is that we must go from this convention and say, America, you must be born again. Let's take some deep breaths. I love reading King. He gets me fired up. Let's take some deep breaths, and I invite you this morning, and just in a spirit of silence, to consider King's words. What do you think it's going to take to be born again, to restructure our society? When you're ready, you can join Beth in singing.
We shall not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We shall not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We shall not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We shall not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We shall not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We shall not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started.
In the summer of 1965, King decided to take a break. One of the only times he actually did this. He took a break from all of the demonstrations and leadership responsibilities of the civil rights movement. He rented a house in Jamaica because he really wanted some time to sit and think about next steps of the movement. By then, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act had passed, and he was facing a lot of new things. He was facing a Black empowerment movement that was advocating building a separate state and even violence, which was not what he wanted. And he knew that the increased demands of Blacks for their rights was going to necessitate greater changes than just voting and equal rights laws. He wrote, with Selma and the Voting Rights Act, one phase of development in the civil rights revolution came to an end. But it was just one phase. He knew that the structural systemic changes needed to happen, to go deeper, that we were in no way done, and a new phase needed to happen. But where do we go from here? This was his big question. Now, he knew in the back of his mind, he knew that there were two things about the US that was a great experiment. There were sort of these two intertwining hopes. One is that democracy can actually work long term. That if you give everyone one vote, that collectively the people will act in the best interests of the nation. But you have to give everybody the right to vote. But our founders also knew, and King knew, that people aren't perfect and that our democracy needed checks and balances, right? So this was the great experience. We give people, but we also give some boundaries around things. The second great experiment of the United States is that we can create a country filled with incredible amounts of diversity. And nowhere else, at least certainly that I'm aware of in this beautiful world, do we have so much diversity, so many different cultures, different peoples living together, trying to figure out how to be together, right? I mean, you think about it, like China doesn't have that. India doesn't have that, not on the scale that we have. Some European countries are starting to struggle through increased immigration, but not on the scale that is the United States. We are a great experiment in diversity. So when King was asking, where do we go from here? Part of the problem is that there's no precedence for this country. We are in many ways kind of unique. Now, when I say that we're unique, I'm not saying that we're better than other countries. That's called exceptionalism. I mean, as a matter of fact, President-elect Biden said in a speech about the riots, he says, you know, this isn't us. We're better than this. Really? That's exceptionalism, right? That's everyone else. That's not us. But the reality is that this is us. This is our shadow that has been growing for hundreds of years. This shadow has been growing and growing. It began on the fateful day when European settlers came across the ocean and set foot on this beautiful land and began a systemic genocide of the native peoples. It began when the first slaves were brought over from Africa to build the infrastructure and greed of our country. It began every time we, those in power, used immigrants as scapegoats. Our shadow has grown and grown, all the while we say, aren't we so great? And now we're facing all of the results of that, of ignoring all of that. And so we're asking, where do we go from here? The same as King did 55 years ago. And most on the conservative side, not all, but most on the conservative side are saying we need to get back to unity and healing. But what if we never had unity? What if the wounds that have been stabbed into the body of America are still festering because the knife is still there? We've never even pulled it out. We've never cleaned the wound. Now, other people, mostly progressives, but not exclusively, are saying, no, you can't have unity without accountability and justice. And as you know, I think they're right. But what about the accountability and justice for the hundreds of years of genocide, slavery, and oppression? And sometimes that question feels so big, we just go, well, you know, it happened so long ago. I mean, what could we do now? Can't we just move on? We can't change the past. And well, we can't change the past, but we can build a better future. And in order to do that, we have to face our past. We have to face our shadow, our history, and what led us to where we are. And it isn't about wallowing in guilt and shame. Can we get rid of that, please? It's about having the courage to talk about it, to wrestle with how it has changed us, not for the better. And there are precedents now around the world for how people walked humbly and faced their terrible past. We can look at Germany and their Nazi past, right? I mean, they do everything by telling in their history like we were wrong. They put up plaques where Jewish people used to live and point that out. Never forget. South Africa had the Truth and Reconciliation trials that has begun process of healing. We have to face our past honestly and full on. Government officials have to admit and apologize for doing things wrong, for, say, lying and causing a riot. Because until we have reckoning, until we do have a reckoning, until we can even have the courage to admit that we're wrong, we can't have unity. I'm sorry, I wish it were true. I wish it weren't true, but that's the thing. And here's the other thing that's sort of amazing to me. It's like, okay, you realize that no one's going anywhere, right? Native peoples aren't saying, okay, fine, we're out of here. Black people aren't saying, well, I'm going elsewhere. White people are here to stay. All the various peoples and cultures that have created this amazingly beautiful and broken nation, we're entrenched, we're here, we're not going anywhere. So we gotta figure this out, people. Where do we go from here? And King didn't have any simple answers, honestly. He was feeling his way forward. What he saw, however, was an unhealthy and unholy connection between racism and capitalism, militarism, right? He was facing the Vietnam War. And for him, it began with asking questions. Why are there 40 million poor people in the richest country in the world? Why are there still poor people in this country? And it's growing. And these isms, these racism, capitalism, they're so big, so entrenched with each other, like cogs that turn one another in a never-ending cycle, that he knew it was going to take some radical change in order for that to break down. And he said, America must be born again. He was talking about fundamental changes, a revolution. But for King, of course, always it was a non-violent revolution. When King was assassinated, his vision, his movement faltered. And now great work, I want to say, hasn't been done. It's wonderful things. New cogs have been broken down and new systems in place. We've got more rights for women. We've got marriage equality. And yet we find ourselves swinging back around to the same crossroad around racism and white supremacy. Where do we go from here? Because it's never left. It just went underground, right? Jim Crow laws got replaced with mass incarceration, right? And we think, oh, but we had affirmative action. I mean, don't ask, don't tell, didn't that work? No. We give sort of shallow lip service in our history about all of these things. We acknowledge, okay, there was slavery, but then we talk about manifest destiny in the same breath. We think that we're exceptional, the greatest nation on earth, but we're also one of the most broken nations on the earth. You know, President Trump's supporters and President Trump didn't come out of nowhere. They are our shadow made manifest. We are exceptional in that, unlike most other nations, we have the hubris, the audacity, right, to think that we don't have to deal with our shadow. We can say we want unity, but only at the cost of division. We want healing, but only at the cost of oppression. We cannot go back. We are at a crossroads. And as King said 55 years ago, we have before us the glorious opportunity to inject a new dimension of love into the veins of our civilization. I love that man's words. We have the glorious opportunity to inject a new dimension of love into the veins of our civilization. What does that new injection of love look like? Justice and accountability. It means dealing with our shadow. And let's look at that shadow for a minute. I'll put it, because we're at a church, let's put this in a spiritual context. And I love Buddhism, right? Okay, so Buddhism has some really helpful ways of understanding and dealing with our shadows, because Buddhism sees broken systems. It sees thoughts and actions and emotions as all interrelated, as part of a system that influence one another. And unhealthy systems, Buddhists see as being created by what they call the three poisons. And those three poisons are greed, hatred, and denial. Isn't that interesting? Greed, hatred, and denial. And I think that these are at the heart of the unhealthy culture, unhealthy system in America too. Now, I just want to say also that greed, hatred, and denial, these sound really harsh to me. Like, we see them as something that's over there that other people do. This isn't me. But the reality is that these three poisons, they're incredibly subtle and insidious. I mean, and we're susceptible to all of them, me included. Let me just define for you a little bit about what we mean by each of these. So greed. Now when I think of greed, I think of those misers, pouring over their money, or we think of big corporations who abuse the environment and human rights, and that's just greed, right? But greed is way more subtle than that. It is whenever we choose power or money, which is a form of power, over people and relationships. Whenever we choose power, money over people and relationships. And that is the heart of capitalism. Think about it. If we shop at a store that treats people poorly because it's convenient to us, that's a form of greed. I remember when this newspaper in Spokane, Washington endorsed President Trump at the last election, he said, well, we know he's an absolutely horrible human being and he's done some really terrible things, he's causing harm, but he's good for business. This is greed. This is choosing money over people. And in fact, our economic system is almost entirely built on greed. If you look at Wall Street, for example, our system of public shares, right, of having shareholders and investing in this, it requires that money be put before people. While the shareholders are people, the goal ultimately is to give money as much as possible to the shareholders at any cost. And this is what has caused so many problems in our country. So that's greed. So what about hatred? Now, hatred is another really hugely loaded word, right? We think of people screaming obscenities and racist remarks, but really, hatred is any time we dehumanize someone or dehumanize a people. It is the basis of racism, of sexism, ableism, transphobia, every ism out there. King called it thingifying people. I love that, thingifying. And it begins so subtly. It's when we label or name call someone. And you know, it's really hard not to do that. I probably did it to President Trump last week after trying really hard not to. I actually went back and I changed a bunch of things because I didn't want to thingify him. I don't want to call it his behaviors. I don't call him Cheeto head or buffoon or any of those things. Those are dehumanizing labels. I don't say those things not because I respect him, but because I don't want to go down that slippery slope of becoming that which I despise. Hatred is insidious. Hatred is blaming incarceration rates on Black people, on them. Hatred is blaming those who ask us to basically reckon with our past for all the problems. Hatred is blaming BLM, Me Too, and other movements that force us to reckon with our shadow. So hatred is really insidious. And then there's denial or delusion. Now, again, it's a pretty harsh word, but one that I think the most of us can probably relate to because, you know, we're really good at seeing it in others, aren't we, right? Not so much on ourselves, but I also think that this is a lot of what is at our problem. Let me just give you one example. I just was sort of like, wow, okay. So 2 examples from last week. There was a guy named Doug Sweet. He was one of the rioters at the Capitol who was arrested. And when he asked, you know, did you think about what you were doing? And he said, well, you know, I stood at the door and I hesitated before going in. And I prayed, Lord, is this the right thing to do? Is this what I need to do? I checked with the Lord. I checked with him 3 times and I never heard a no. Okay, dude, you hesitated. That should have been your first clue that you knew you were doing something wrong. Denial, I think, is at the root of some of our biggest problems right now. That gut reaction that we know something is wrong, but we refuse to look at it closer because it goes against what we want. We want peace, we want unity, we want warm fuzzies. We don't want to go and be uncomfortable or look at our own hearts about what ultimately is right or wrong. And not everybody did. The Representative Peter Meijer of Michigan was one of the only 10 Republicans who voted for the impeachment of President Trump. And he said that while he had all of these excuses and his colleagues were giving him all these excuses, you know, we want unity, it's not the right time, it won't accomplish anything. He said, no, I had to listen to my gut. And my gut said, no, we have to have accountability. And he knew he had to do the right thing. He had the courage to do the right thing. Our refusal to look at our past and want to gloss over it because we don't have the courage to do so. We want to sweep it under the rug. And I think in part because we don't know what all the answers are. But there are. Buddhists don't leave us hanging. There are 3 remedies for these 3 poisons, right? So greed, of course, generosity is the opposite of greed, but that is choosing people over power and money, choosing relationships over power or money. This is what King was talking about. The answer isn't communism, but it isn't capitalism either. We need to create something new. And the remedy for hatred is to humanize people. And we do that with compassion. It's recognizing and seeing the full humanity, our humanity, and everyone around us. When someone else suffers, so do we. And that's the definition of compassion. We suffer together. I just want to take a moment to think about this. Brene Brown pointed this out in her most recent podcast. She says, isn't it amazing or horrifying that in this day and age, there has to exist an organization that humanizes Black people? Because that's exactly what Black Lives Matter is all about, is trying to humanize what we have thingified. So denial, delusion, what is the remedy for that? Well, obviously courage, but also curiosity. This is, I think, where we have to begin. We have to ask those questions. That's what King was doing. Where do we go from here? What are the tough questions we need to ask? We begin to ask these difficult questions about how our structures feed white supremacy culture. Questions like, why are there still 4 million poor people in this country? What role does free speech have in this country when it includes lies and creates violence? We can ask simple questions like, why does a hairdresser spend more time in training than a police officer? And why are our prisons full of mental health patients and addicts? We need to ask ourselves fundamental, big questions. And in doing so, when we're making decisions, we can ask ourselves simple questions about those poisons. Does this decision choose power or money over people? Does this decision choose power, money over people? Think about that wall that Trump wanted to build. The other question, am I dehumanizing others? In what ways am I dehumanizing people? When we lock children in cages, taking them away from their parents, right? How are we dehumanizing people? And am I listening to lies from myself and from others? How do I inform myself deeply? And in order to answer these questions, and many more, we're going to have to think differently, right? We who are so entrenched in a white supremacy subtle system, we need to listen to those who can see it differently from us, those who are oppressed. There are amazing, creative solutions out there around healthcare and education and incarceration and police reform and democratic reforms and gun safety, but we don't listen to those who have been hurt most by the system. If we don't, we will go back to the way it was, to brokenness and to the deterioration of our democracy and a failure of the great experiment. We have to listen to those who know how to see this differently. I'm going to geek out for you in a minute. One of my favorite novels is by Brandon Sanderson. And in it, there's a character named Dalinar Kholin, and I'll bet there's like one or two people who are totally geeking out with me at the moment. Now, Dalinar is a king. He's a leader of a nation. But to get where he got to be king, he did horrible, horrible things. Genocide, burning whole cities to the ground, all in the desire to unite his kingdom. He was a brutal man when he was back in his 20s and 30s. And now he's an older man. He's like in his 50s or 60s. He's changed. And he wants to do what's right, not just for his country, but for his entire world. But his past keeps coming back to haunt him. His allies stab him in the back or they don't trust him. And he asks himself, what's the best step a person can take? What's the best step a person can take? Wise people tell him, well, it's the first step. But he's confused. He says, but what if my first step was a bad step? What is the first step? Back then when he was a tyrant? Is it now? And he comes to realize that the best step a person can take is not the first step. It's the next step. It's the next one after that and the next and the next and the next. We cannot change the past. This is true, but we can face it. And that is the next step. The best step in order to keep moving forward. In order to preserve this great experiment, we must have accountability and justice. We must ask questions. We must face our shadow. How shall we overcome? Someday, together. We've got to put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. My people, Let us sing.
You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Now I'm gonna give you the call, and you're going to reply with the response. Don't give up hope. Don't give up hope. You're not alone. You're not alone. Don't you give up. Don't you give up. Keep moving on and keep moving on. You got to put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Lift up your eyes, lift up your eyes. Don't you despair, don't you despair. Look up ahead, look up ahead. The path is there, the path is there. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love.
Unitarian Universalist congregations are fully self-supporting, meaning that members and friends raise all funds for the operating budget, ministries, and programs of the church. We are ever grateful for your gifts of time, treasure, and talent. OCUUC amplifies that spirit of generosity by sharing half of the plate we receive with an organization that shares our values. This month, we are supporting Stand Up for Kids. Stand Up for Kids Orange County has the overall goal of leading homeless youth to self-sufficiency and preventing at-risk youth from gang involvement, substance abuse, teen pregnancy, and from dropping out of high school. You can find more information about this through the blast. There are now 3 ways in which you can give online. The first is through our website, www.ocuuc.org. The second, through an app called Give. You can download it on the App Store for your smartphone, and once set up, you can use it for any of your online giving, including your pledge. The third method is by texting 714-942-1131. Simply text to that number and in a message, type the amount. As always, thank you for your generosity as the offering is given and received.
How many times have you heard someone say, if I had his money, I could do things my way. But little they know that it's so hard to find one rich man in 10 with a satisfied mind. Once I was waiting in fortune and fame, everything that I dreamed for to get a start in life's game. Then suddenly it happened, I lost every dime. But I'm rich richer by far, with a satisfied mind. Money can't buy back your youth when you're old, or a friend when you're lonely, or a love that's grown cold. The wealthiest person is a pauper at times, compared to the man with a satisfied mind. When my life's ended and my time has run out, my friends and my loved ones, I'll leave, there's no doubt. But there's one thing for certain, when it comes my time, I'll leave this old world with a satisfied mind. How many times have you heard someone say,
Please join in singing We Gather Together, a song that puts our intentions into words and expresses our gratitude for the many gifts we share.
We gather together, we gather as one, for peace, love, and justice for everyone. We give from our hearts to show that we care. We can change lives with what we share.
Oh, let's all take some deep breaths this morning, maybe a little stretch. Oh, now is a time to go inside. It's a time when we honor important events and people in our lives, and you are invited, one and all, whether you are a member, a friend, visitor, everyone is welcome to this weekly ritual that we call Joys and Sorrows. Now, you may have come here today holding something close to your heart. You heard me and my passion was what I've been holding close to my heart today. In those moments from maybe from the last week, the last days, the months, hours, whatever it is, it's something that struck you at your core. And if you'd like to honor such a profound joy or sorrow, you are invited to do so. And you can do this by lighting a candle at home. It's a wonderful way to honor what you hold in your heart. But if you'd like to share your joy or sorrow with the congregation, you can write it in the chat. And so let's take a few moments as we kind of breathe, a little in contemplation as Beth plays some music. And then I'll begin to read joys and sorrows out loud. And please forgive me if I miss a joy or sorrow. You can help me not to miss any by waiting to type comments to an expressed joy or sorrow until we're finished. I know people would love to hear what your support and love. But if you could hold off until I'm done reading, that would be awesome. I'll start this morning by a couple of joys and sorrows that were sent to me ahead of time. Katie Rates, who often does our slideshow on Sunday morning, meant to actually have this last week, but she shares a joy that last semester was her most successful in law school, and she's excited to announce that she will serve as a federal court clerk in Riverside after graduating this May. So we're really excited for Katie. Go gal. It's so wonderful to know that she's learning about environmental law and will be a lawyer for the earth, which I think is wonderful. And Sharon Ball also sent a candle. She said, I'm praying for the safety and health of Joe and Kamala next week. I think that she voices that for most of us. Yeah, we're all praying for that. And Dave, he said he'd like to light a candle of appreciation to a close friend who contributed $10,000 to his son's church in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Dave's son is another Unitarian Universalist minister, to help replace the sign that burned during the civil unrest last August and to improve the church's general level of security. Amen. That's lovely. And Scott also voices something we're all thinking about. He says, I pray the turning point comes sooner rather than later. Yeah. And Sunny says, oh, she says her son's daughter's father died yesterday, her ex-husband. I'm really sorry, Sunny, for you and your family. Marilyn has a concern for a family friend, Mark, who was diagnosed with COVID this past week and admitted to the hospital on Tuesday, and that had to be placed on a ventilator on Thursday. Wow, that escalated quickly. I'm so sorry to hear that. Amelia also prays and hopes that our country can have a peaceful transition and more loving and caring country. That's Erin, sorry, not Amelia. Jan has the joy that in 3 days we'll be welcoming our new president and vice president. Yeah. Bonnie, can't wait for Wednesday to come. I think we're all kind of there, yes. And Jordan says he'd like to light a candle of joy for his business this week. He's gotten organized and has been implementing new strategies, and it's finally paid off in his marketing. And someone's reached out to him to make them a song for their son's birthday, and he got sponsored by a shoe company. He got their support, and other key players in the music industry. Thank you all. Thank you. From Deadmall. Is that Deadmall Font? I'm not sure. But thank you. And so he's sending out gratitude to the world. Oh, Paula, I'm so sorry to hear that her best friend's husband died last week from COVID. This is hitting close to home, isn't it? It's so bad now. Oh, I want you all to be safe. Yeah, Ken says he has a sorrow over another loved one gone to the other world, where Antifa stormed the U.S. Capitol and why our state's being fenced, that BLM is all about riots, looting, and vandalism. All those lies that Biden is corrupt, that is evil. Oh, I'm so sorry. It is hard when a loved one, when someone you care deeply about, believes these lies, these conspiracy theories. We hold them in love too. And Jordan says it's pronounced dead mouse. Thank you. I got to get a little more hip here, I guess. You're going to have to help me work on that, Jordan. All right, everyone. Let us hold all of these universal joys and celebrations, and all these universal hurts and sadness, whether they were spoken or silent. Let our joys remind us to be thankful. Our concerns remind us to hope, and our sorrows remind us to connect with one another. Let all these moments remind us that we're not alone. We're all in this. Please join me in a spirit of prayer. And the prayer I'm using is by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And the wording may sound archaic and maybe a little too Christian to our ears, but I believe that the sentiment is sound. Oh, before I do, I want to say Ashley Ryan has a joy. So grateful the firefighters and police were helping with the COVID vaccines, and grateful that she was able to get vaccinated last Tuesday. Amen. My best friend got vaccinated. She works in the healthcare industry. Amen. So glad. All right, in a spirit of prayer. Most gracious and all-wise God, before whose face the generations rise and fall, thou in whom we live and move and have our being, we thank thee for all thy good and gracious gifts, for life and for health, for food and for raiment, for the beauties of nature and the love of human nature. We come before thee painfully aware of our inadequacies and shortcomings. We realize that we stand surrounded with the mountains of love, and we deliberately dwell in the valley of hate. We stand amid the forces of truth and deliberately lie. We are forever offered the high road, and yet we choose to travel the low road. For these sins, O God, forgive. Break the spell of that which blinds our minds. Purify our hearts that we may see thee. O God, in these turbulent days when fear and doubt are mounting high, give us broad vision, penetrating eyes, and the power of endurance. Help us to work with renewed vigor for a warless world, for a better distribution of wealth, for a brotherhood that transcends race and color. In the name and spirit of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Let us join together as we extinguish the flame of our chalice and say together, we extinguish our chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. We are a congregation made up of people who all believe differently, and yet when we gather together virtually or otherwise, we make up one loving community. We need not think alike to love alike. If you are a guest, a visitor, or someone who hasn't yet been known to us, I invite you to become part of this beloved community, if even just for today. We encourage you to write in the chat your name and where you are from. If you would like to know more about our church, please see our church website for ways you can get involved and sign up for our weekly email called The Blast at blast@ocuuc.org. If you would like to know more about membership, please contact us at membership@ocuuc.org. If you would like to find more info about how to join the programs for children and youth, please contact Reverend Judy at refjudy@ocuuc.org. Our community is enriched by its visitors, guests, and friends, and we hope that they find a spiritual home here. We want everyone to feel a part of this beloved community, so please reach out and we will help you get connected. After the benediction, we will have a short period where everyone can wave and say hello. Then those that remain will be put into Zoom breakout rooms for 20 minutes if you so choose. We invite you to check in and get to know the people in your group and welcome any visitors. And now Reverend Sean has some announcements.
So yes, announcements, all sorts of fun things going on. I just want to make a reminder, next Saturday, we are ordaining Rika. I'll try to send out an extra special blast, but it'll be the same worship number that you log into every week. So please come out for that and cheer her on at 2:30 on Saturday. And then also tomorrow, in honor of Martin Luther King Day, we're doing a day of service as best we can, being isolated and everything. And there are two things that you can do, one of which is you can donate to Mercy House if you have the means of doing that. And there's a list on our website, a link to an Amazon gift site, and all that is going to go directly to Sarah Hunter, who will then take it over to Mercy House for us. So it makes it really easy for you to do. And then the other thing is you can write letters to people who are in senior homes, who maybe are feeling isolated and shut away. And so you can also look to the website for examples of that. And I know that also if you contact Sarah, she may have some good ideas, or if you have some good ideas of where to do that as well. But if you want to just take a few moments on Monday to write a letter, do a little shopping, that's one way that we can honor King in moving forward. So thank you. So let us sing our benediction today with Beth.
Be safe, be well, you mean the world to me. Be safe, be well, you mean the world to me.
The words of King, we have before us the glorious opportunity to inject a new dimension of love into the veins of our civilization. So like beating COVID, people, let's go out, be doctors, nurses, and EMTs of love. This service is over. Let our service continue.